Welcome to the Autism Society Southern Arizona's Lunch and Learn with Divergent. Today, we're very excited to learn about this voc rehab program. So I'll let Tom take it away.
Hello, thanks, Kate. I'm Tom Corey. With today, I'm going to be giving a presentation on, remote work transition. That's going to include voc rehab programs and also Medicaid, which is a cooler, newer space for getting into. And a lot of the focus will be on job skills trainings, work adjustment, and soft skills training, job placement, job coaching, and also pre-ets for the high school audience. So that's me. Brief background about myself. I'm the director of program and I've worked in vocational rehabilitation services for the last 15 years. As the founding director of a nonprofit program at the Arc of Philadelphia, where it really started a lot of these new approaches towards integrating folks into different kinds of technology careers, including non-technical roles within that. And that was some of my first experience supporting people with remote roles. I've been at Divergent for the last 5 years, where we've grown to become the nation's first and largest um, organization focusing on providing remote services that can be for in-person jobs or remote jobs, and helping kind of fill that ecosystem. On a personal note, I myself am a neurodiverse individual. I'm the son of a mother with disabilities, and my father's a clinical psychologist. So a lot of early experiences kind of getting familiar with the communities and support services around them. And so this is kind of the question I would pose to everybody here. You're probably trying to understand, could remote work and service be a good fit for your loved one? Of course, very individual question, but if this presentation at least provides some ideas and sort of just a framework to start to look at how you would go about exploring that, hopefully we can be successful in that. Okay, so I tried to make this a very basic slide to give you some ideas of the different kinds of age groups when you're getting started, what that might look like. And this might sound a little extreme, but I've tried to also center this around, even that younger age, around 10, 14, and even when a young adult, younger than that, how do you get started? Familiarizing the individual to work through volunteerism and conversations is a great way to get started. So the conversation can happen in a few different ways. This can be about sharing more about the work that you do, pointing out in the community different jobs that people do. As we know, many in our population, love research and love getting deep into things. So helping them understand, what are the roles that people do at work? Get Try to spark some of that interest and lay that groundwork to the concept of work. Volunteerism. I mean, of course, Autism Society, that could be a great place to start. It could even be explaining to them, when you're conducting volunteer work, what that looks like for Autism Society or other organizations. It could be through your congregation, your community center, or even finding, your own sort of special projects. One of my favorite stories for this is working with a family where very early on, through their son's interest in railroads, found a local community railroad. These things exist, heritage railroading, it's called, and small lines and things, and they started to develop, a lot of the work habits early on in a supportive environment, and the railroad was very receptive to opening up to this young adult. Um, and then the school to work transition age. This would be 17 to 14. I will point out this is also the age at 14 when the individual is eligible to apply to vocational rehabilitation. I'll say this again later, but we do provide vocational rehabilitation services through Arizona DES, Voc Rehab. So if you would like any assistance in helping the individual you support apply to that, you can contact us, and the information for that is at the end of this presentation. Your school and IEP is also another way to achieve this. So this is a good time to experiment and further expose them to work. It could be part-time work, online or in person. And of course, volunteerism can take form at any age. So continuing those habits might be reasonable. At the secondary education, so 18 plus, we're going to be looking at, how do you narrow down and look at these educational and professional goals through VR supports. All right. Oh, I'm going the wrong direction. Okay, so a little bit more about us, Divergent. We do all of these services virtually. I understand that for some of you, that might not, fully be where you see your child yet. But I'll try to give some more examples about how remote services, um, along the lines of these areas that we have about this being highly collaborative and modern trainings are good ways to start to look at this as maybe these are transitional services. You could start out remote and also giving people a better sense of how the majority of our services in Arizona are provided one-to-one. We do have different models that incorporate group learning, which is another great way to go about it. So you can still, really focus on the individual, but also really save a lot of those vital resources like, time being the big one here in terms of commute and everything, and just really help focus on getting some of these things more readily available at home or in a community center setting for your individual. Okay, so these are some of the pathways that we look at supporting people in. It's of course not exhaustive. There could be another explicit call out for in person, but that's a little bit covered here in things like if it's like, physical, we have this warehouse logistics. And also another way to look at this is some of the supports, so being able to deliver job coaching is one great area that we find we're able to do for a large set of the population. And it's communicating like this over Zoom. Um, and helping also through our trainings also provide that education and support so that they can access it. Customer service roles, quality assurance, analyst roles. I have examples of the companies included here. So we've worked with supporting individuals being placed within the IT and cybersecurity within Arizona State University, and then also healthcare, clerical roles, things like United Healthcare. So if you're new to the vocational rehabilitation world, these are some of the kind of proper noun services and trainings to familiarize yourself with. This is going to be at the level that I showed in the beginning when you're really in that work to school transition age. As I said, at 14, your individual is eligible for service at that time. Commonly, that might be this bottom category here called pre-ETS. That's employment transition services. And that is a dedicated program commonly administered at schools. It doesn't have to be within a school setting, and there's many providers in the state that provide this. You could think of this as kind of a mini contained ecosystem for people exploring jobs, working on some of those volunteer and work skills, like I'd said, that become the transferable skills that we talk about when an adult is really starting to look at this. So it's always good to call out that pre-ets is a great opportunity to set the foundation of these employment skills and concepts to the individual, but then it's very likely that they will still engage in different parts of these as adults. So job skills, work adjustment, that's really kind of a fancy word for applied social skills to a work context. So, and then that placement and coaching, I will make more indications about how Medicaid now more and more is able to support with coaching for extended service, as it's called. Extended service essentially just means that that's going to be past the deadline or area that Voc Rehab focuses on, which is employment sustainability. Okay, so past that point, or if they say somebody still needs additional service, that's where Medicaid can help fill that gap. And importantly, that can happen during, after, and before they even enter Voc Rehab services. Um, okay, so I covered already the things about myself, but here are some things on the right-hand side that go into more detail about, a lot of our selling points. Digital and technical foundational job skills. So that's Microsoft Office, Google Suites, even things like getting people familiarized with Zoom. More and more, we're looking at how Zoom and telecommunications is such an important part of many jobs, even if they're in person, or even if we're talking about things like helping support people understand how to access payroll information or log their time online if they are in a physical customer service or other kinds of roles like that. Um, so the specific tools and software, these are a whole range, right? There's kind of some big words in here. Agile management. This is for more technical folks. So it's important for us to include these in here because these are very underserved areas for our population who may be interested in technical roles. That's a technical methodology that software programmers, program managers, uh, folks like myself use. Productivity tools, that's a whole range from Microsoft Office calendars, Google calendars, um, and certain adaptive techniques we can also teach to folks. But then time tracking, I made some reference to that, the telecommunication, and all these cloud-based like Google and MS Office. So this does also, again, cover a range from customer service to technology. But what we really excel at is that exploration and helping people make the right kind of informed choices about what these jobs are and what it can mean for them. And then we are always looking at opportunities to help people actually put these into an applied practice. We understand that many of our learners, the hypothetical and the academic parts, that can be covered in things that they learn and maybe from an academic and conceptual level. But helping them cope with this applied aspect is super important too. So that's things like sensory and emotional regulation in a applied setting. Um, and that's only going to help strengthen them in those future job placements. Just a snapshot of some of the employers and uh wage rates that we've worked with for people. So we're very proud of the fact that we do try to lead people towards, livable and sustainable wage. Separate conversation to this that I encourage everybody to engage with if their loved one is going to use, other supports like SSI. to receive also benefits counseling, because any of these ranges and rates can be, tailored to find the right kind of job that would still afford them the ability to receive some additional economic support through those programs and also retain Medicaid or other programs. A little bit of our success rate here, working with all across all of our programs, we really strive to get people to some point of completion. This does not mean that they always go on to another service with us. Somebody may engage in a work adjustment training program with us, which is that social skills aspect, and then transition to an in-person provider. Or we're also counting within this where we say favorable outcomes. There's four main favorable outcomes that we count for individuals. That's employment placement, additional vocational rehabilitation services and helping identify what those are going to be. Supporting somebody to continue education is huge. Oftentimes we're working with individuals who may be kind of at a standstill. They're a little bit stuck. And so helping them know what education and supports they can continue from there. And then also volunteerism and internships is included in that category. Um, then when we get more specifically for the CIE, that stands for Community Integrated Employment. This is the gold standard of employment that we work within. There, of course, are other ways of achieving employment and sustainability. Of course, that could be things like self-employment. That could be even if somebody looks at having community-based activities around volunteerism or more seasonal work as well. There's many different ways that somebody may want as a goal to have that goal of success, right? Success is a relative term in the sense, but for voc rehab purposes, they kind of take a more strict approach to that. So anytime I'm talking about vocational rehabilitation, I'm going to be talking about community integrated employment as that gold standard. But it's worth exploring. If you do have some interest in those other areas, still encourage people to make that individual determination. After the meeting, I will provide this presentation. I won't switch over right now to these links, but it just kind of gives you an idea of how we've made different sort of looks and tailored customization to our different audiences. We go off of a more general VR term, and that can include many individuals without features of these lower categories put in here of intellectual disability and learning disability, where we're going to really tailor a lot of the language and interface to individuals. But we find it's most important to us that we're providing these different kinds of focus because, as we know, the population exists in a spectrum. And so, these can be additional features that our customers have that we have, tailored services towards. This is a little bit more of a transparent view of how these services are billed and what this is publicly available information for you to know when you're working with any provider. You can see how much that service costs billed to the state, not the customer, or individual with a disability. And just some expectations of about how long or how many hours might be billed for people to reach these milestones and outcomes. So we have really ranges put down here. 70 to 90 hours for job skills training. Maybe that's learning software programs, some of those more hard skills. 60 to 90 hours for those social skills trainings under the work adjustment category. career exploration, 40 to 80, and then job placement and coaching. This is really just focused on voc rehab right now, but I'll try to give more indication about how Medicaid is super important to this because that's really kind of your extra credit card if you think about it that way. That's that little extra cash that you have in support to be able to stretch these things and really get those important services paid for by the individual through their health insurance. This is just a little bit of a snapshot of, what are some of the things that we include within our services. This is no additional charge to VR or the individual, but if you're familiar with programs like AZ TAP, which is a great program within the state, I encourage you to look at. We frankly have still met much of their concept here, but we've been able to integrate this into our services and to know that many services will provide these additional stipends and support to people to access technology, that's smartphones, laptops, 4G Wi-Fi hotspots, and also that IT help so that frankly people can use it. So we're really focused on making people's experience um a smooth transition, giving them the tools to kind of avoid some of these hangups that people trying to access these things often find. So we're able to provide some of these early interventions to get people access. And we've had really great success stories in your big rural and diverse state, right? So this has worked, in far out places of the state as much as it's worked for people, within Maricopa or Pima County, um, who will still face access changes. So that's a great feature. And then I tried to give, a little bit of a snapshot of how you can see that really for voc rehab services, there's different kinds of patterns. And of course, if you're familiar at all with the concept of co-occurring disability at all or co-occurring condition, um, I do also include some of the things within the serious mental health population. And sure, if you looked at it as just that, if they just had those conditions, but that could just as easily be applied to any of these. And there would be one big long line. If I stacked them all up, somebody would do all of these things in some successive order. Typically, that more idealized successive order looks like somebody starting career exploration, doing a skills training, a work adjustment training, um, moving on to job placement and coaching. So that's how, again, you can see that these are really individualized pathways. And for people who are not familiar with vocational rehabilitation, there's a vital role in all of this. It's the vocational rehabilitation counselor, or VRC, sometimes it's called. That's a very interesting kind of field and specialization that is not as we think of a counselor, if we're talking about that being a social worker or a licensed therapist, psychologist, anything like that. Really what they're doing is having awareness from those fields. So they're what they call customers. So if you keep hearing me use that term, or apologies as also well, I may use the term disability. That is the term in language used by the state. Okay. And of course in favor of, the person-centered approach and try to minimize that stigma around what disability means here, outside of difference being this is more medical and clinical language, and providers like Divergent fill this space in more of a community approach to this, where we're going to use a lot more of that person-centered and individualized language to describe this separate from the medical and clinical designation of a disability or condition. So, a lot of words there, but basically, the vocational rehabilitation counselor helps address what they call barriers to employment. So that can be a social barrier, a physical barrier like transportation. It can be educational barriers, so supporting people through school through that training, the job placement. So some of these specialized approaches as far as teaching people how to write a good resume, coaching them through some of that social communication aspect. Um, those are all things that the provider does, of which Divergent, places like Goodwill, ARC chapters, you name it, places that will be on basically a list. That's what it is. You could think of the vocational rehabilitation counselor as being kind of that keeper and advisor of that list of approved providers, just like you would see in a healthcare context. So this is almost like, if you thought of VR as kind of being this quasi insurance plan or funding source that you have, the Voc Rehab counselor is really that service coordinator. So again, I'm purposely mixing some terms here just to give you an idea of how these are related to other systems you may be more familiar with, if that's in the developmental disability services, the DDS access, home and base community waivers. You might be familiar with a case manager. Well, similar type concept. Though distinct in the way the voc rehab counselor works in that community integrated employment goal space. And a good development in this whole field is these services are becoming a lot more integrated by design. So what I mean by that integration is, I'll repeat this part I said earlier about thinking about how voc rehab is able to integrate and exist between all these different services. If that's your primary and secondary educational services, counselors can work with them in that context. If that's somebody in the DDS service category, they'll also support people in that category. So there's many different ways to fund and support individuals in any of these pathways I have lined in these services. So, if this is maybe more a call out for folks and also AS, that these are just some ideas about how you could get more involved to try to support if remote learning and remote vocational education is continuing to look for grants in your area. I could give a separate presentation about where we've been successful doing this. Slides taken from one of our pilot programs with Northern Arizona University, where we focused with a neurodiverse and DDE population to find grants to support people. We also have some really exciting stories from different AS chapters in the Inland Empire, supporting them to find grants and expand these services. Your school, through the IP or the IEP. I slipped up there because I didn't add this into the presentation, but there's also something, just for your awareness, I might want to mention. There's something called the IPE, which is dangerously close to the IEP, and that is the individual plan of employment. That's a crucial planning stage that anybody going into VR works on, but at the IEP level and school level, within the 14 to as far up as 22, if they participate in what's called the extended school year, extended services category, that your young adult can benefit from planning employment and is really a right that you have and an expectation that the schools must be providing for that post educational transition. And also talk to us, talk to us, talk to the AS chapters and find people in your community supporting these goals. So really quick summary, we provide all remote services to all general customers as well as our neurodiverse populations. Transition age, that's that pre-ETS category. The Medicaid part, I'm kind of putting this in at the end a little bit, but just knowing that Medicaid is an important aspect to this if you want to have additional services for your loved one. And again, we will mail equipment, we will help people access, and then we will, really our course focusing on that community integrated placement for in-person or remote jobs. So this is just more information about if you are somebody who has already VR services available to you in Arizona. Contact our referrals at Divergent. You also have my direct email, tom.corey@divergent.com. Our CEO, he is also always available and can help route you towards the right kind of resources. And I'd previously mentioned too, we can support getting you into VR services as well if that's a need, and also explore our Medicaid services. So that wraps up everything I have. I typically try to pause for questions throughout, but I'd be happy to answer questions for you right now.
Question. All right, I have a question. So, could somebody, like, let's say an adult who was diagnosed later and they have realized that maybe moving to a remote, finding a new career and remote career would be a better option for them for their current state? Is that somebody that you guys could help as well? Would they qualify?
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's a really good call out because especially for our neurodiverse and individuals with audience and individuals with autism specifically, that can be a late in life kind of realization. And also we have worked a lot supporting people who already have some work experience. And so helping them transition that into a remote career, some of the benefits for that we and trainings that we address on is, aspects of environmental control for people. That's super important to our population. But we also provide those tools for talking about how we specifically would approach somebody like that in that situation, that we're trying to also help them learn more in the applied area. How will this really look for them when they're working remotely? And that's what's nice about working with a remote provider, is that provides that opportunity for direct observation and coaching to occur to help work these things out before they transition. And sometimes we will work with folks who start out with that goal, and it's always important to us is that we start with that stated goal that they have, but then it's our duty to provide back observation and support about, what are still barriers, is this a good fit? And we're always going to advocate for additional VR services, or it could be in the Medicaid service category, to help move them along. So there's not really a one approach or amount of time that we take with somebody to do that transition. It's going to be based on the individual success that that person has at that time.
Nice. I like that. My next question is on the other end of the spectrum of what are the benefits of really engaging early in something like this? Because I saw you went all the way down to 11, but like what are the benefits of engaging early on, and when do you actually think people should start thinking about this transition for their kiddo or for
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, I mean, early on benefits, I still think one of the biggest ones is rather than having maybe a finite expectation of uh maybe how many of us, myself included, there was maybe a hard line that your parents may have said, hey, you're 16, get a job, kid. It doesn't have to be like that, right? But to get to that point, um, allowing enough time and starting early to really develop this concept of what employment means um, to the individual. So, um, legal working age in the U.S., which this might sound weird unless you're talking about farms. I don't know. I like to have my own employment jokes for myself, maybe, but I sometimes picture, a lot of people going into the fields, but that exists. That's a different kind of loophole. But really, if we're talking about, non-agricultural fields, individuals could start working as soon as 14. And that can be where working with voc rehab counselor, you can already start to have job coaching for them and advocate for them to get that. That can be part-time. Also, even just to reframe this in a different kind of way, is looking at the younger ages. It's about that conversation, but also responsibility, introducing responsibility. Maybe that comes through allowance, maybe that comes through you know, my early professional experience, being a dog walker, stuff like that, helping out neighbors, helping out grandma. Um, and I think that's always important to provide those early learning environments where you can combine two things, that responsibility, that's the topic, but the rewards, right? Money. Uh, Putting it in those terms and helping individuals responsibly also start to understand what is one stresses one value of work, right? But of course, if any of us have been lucky to have work that we value and a community of work that we value, of course, that can outweigh any monetary benefit. But this is also a time when what we talk about developing work tolerance in individuals. That's a very kind of wonky VR term for basically starting slow and giving people that ability to develop their stamina in the workplace and sort of lowering the stakes for it. Because I don't want to give anybody the impression that, you just the message is not to throw your kids into these situations. It's about controlling the right environment through kind of this network of advocates and community that you are hopefully building around yourself to start to put them in these situations and really using a lot of your intuition. And yes, at some point it is hard to start to look at, how are you going to transition your child, and of course there's many concerns that are valid concerns, right? But start small with it, build the responsibility, introduce rewards, and then really seeing that as a developing process that really, more than advising one standard goal for people, I try to help people see that you want to break that into multiple steps for your individual.
Like that is so exciting. I'm so excited about this. I was so excited to find you guys, and I think this really just feeds a need that we needed to go into the, I don't even know what century we're in, 22nd century, trying to figure out the employment for the next generation. This is super, super exciting. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Jade, did you have anything else? I don't know where you went. Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.